news. It's the one-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. Mr. Floyd, 46-year-old African-American who died after being suffocated by the knee of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin on May the 25th, 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the United States. His death sparked protests across the country and the world. Mr. Chauvin and 3 other officers involved in Mr. Floyd's death, Thomas Lane, Tu Tao, and J. Alexander Kyung, were fired and charged with a variety of crimes. On April 20th, 2021, Derek Chauvin, 45, was found guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Mr. Lane, Mr. Tao, and Mr. Kyung, who had been scheduled to face a joint trial starting in August, will now be tried in March. Joining us to discuss the death of George Floyd and workplace culture is Abayomi Fawehinmi, entrepreneur and human resources professional. Abayomi, thank you so much for joining us. Prof, as I knew you already, Prof, thanks for joining us. A number of corporations in the United States have embarked on racial sensitivity training through human resources in the wake of the death of George Floyd. Beyond that, are there any other workplace lessons to be drawn from his tragic death?
Yeah, I mean, quite a lot. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it always. So quite a lot of lessons to be learned. And like you rightly said, a number of companies have also brought in new measures. You remember there was a similar incident. There was not a similar incident, but there was another racial incident that happened in one of the fast food joints that led to some trainings. Now, so there's a training part. So the training part had been on for a while. But one of the 2 most significant changes that happened in the workplace as a result of this is, one, more companies accepted the fact that there is racial injustice in America. Before now, many people would argue there is no racial injustice. But when they saw that 9 minutes video kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, many people now understood that, yeah, there's a problem, we need to do something about it. So that acknowledgement came. Now, from that acknowledgement now came a number of actions to deal with it. So companies came up with funds to invest in historical Black universities. Companies came up with targets to have the number of Blacks in leadership. Company came up with positions. So the position of diversity and equity officer in the last 1 year is one of the roles that has been created the most in most corporations. And this role was created to report straight to the CEO. That's on the business side. And then there were now a lot of commitments. So there were a lot of conventions and signing of agreements and commitments by CEOs to ensure that Blacks and colored people, and of course, women also get more chances. But at the same time, too, I mean, if we consider that the police itself is a workplace, the U.S. police also changed a number of things about its own culture. So, for example, from like 3 states before that incident to like 20 states in the last 1 year have passed laws banning chokehold. I mean, that kind of hold that led to that man's death and criminalized it. And for me, the biggest thing for me was the fact that Derek Chauvin, the policeman that carried out that dastardly act, was eventually convicted in Minnesota, and all the 4 officers got under a federal indictment. Now, why is that very important? Before now, it was very difficult for you to get policemen convicted, even if you kill people. You remember all the stories we know, Trevor Martins and all those individuals. But what was very different in this case was that the police chief is like the commissioner of police, if you want to use the Nigerian context, testified against the policeman. The supervisor of this policeman, Derek Chauvin, testified against him. In contemporary U.S. history,
to foster growth and development on the continent.
Interestingly, it was the same man. So this man, who is also Black, testified against a policeman in the case. And again, in this situation, testified against him. And so what that shows is that the police is also accepting responsibility and say, hey, it seems we are not doing something right, and we're going to speak against our officers when they do wrong thing, and which is very, very commendable.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. You wrote an article about workplace lessons from the death of George Floyd, and you made the point that people need to be more humane when carrying out duties as employees. Is that directed at state employees in law enforcement, or does that include other professions?
Yeah, it includes everyone. I mean, we need to be more civil as professionals. Now, the peculiarity of state employees that, the last time we were talking about the powers of regulators, right?
Yes.
Now, the peculiarity of state employees have power. So whether the power is either their power to close down your business, or it could be that they have power in the sense that they could arrest you or send you to jail. Now, because of that power gradient, when they decide to misbehave, their abuse of power is more prominent. But also in the private service, you take somebody to a hospital. There was a reported case in a hospital this month A university student was rushed to a clinic, and they said the doctor asked for a police report before they could treat him, and the student died in the process. That was unprofessional, because the Hippocratic law says you should treat the patient first. There's no law in Nigeria that says you need the police order before you can treat a patient. So you realize that abuse of power, which Derek Chauvin did, that led to the death of this man, is also what is expected, what we should stamp out in all organizations. Bosses, supervisors should be humane, they should be kind, they should be fair, and they should be considerate.
It's still along that line on supervisor-employee relationships. You drew a line between George Floyd pleading for room to breathe and Derek Chauvin ignoring his pleas, and supervisors in positions of authority ignoring pleas of people that they manage. How can you explain, flesh that out further?
Yeah, so many organizations listen to the customer but forget that their first customer is the employee, right?
Exactly.
So you see many companies that spend, many organizations spend a lot of money doing customer survey, trying to get people to know what customers want, but they ignore the employee. Now, what I'm just trying to say is that employees will always talk. They will always give feedback. As a leader, you have a responsibility to listen. Now, it's possible you cannot respond to what they want, as in you can't solve that problem, but you have an obligation to listen and provide a response. Many leaders in the workplace that are bad leaders are not bad in themselves. It's just that they have just developed a capacity not to listen to the guys that work for them. So this employee is complaining that my work condition is not good, or is complaining that I closed too late, or is complaining. And like Derek Chauvin, you chose to ignore it. That guy said, I can't breathe 21 times, and they did not listen to him. Now, there are many employees that are shouting, I can't breathe. I don't want to come to work during the weekend because I have a family. I don't want to be closing at 11 p.m. I don't want this to happen to me. And the supervisors are ignoring it. While you may blame Derek Chauvin for killing George Floyd, you are also towing the same line because you are ignoring the complaints of your employees. We've got to listen to people. And that also goes to leadership outside the workplace. The president of Nigeria has no business not listening to us. I mean, why should he have to be state governors and this president, for example, to speak to us? Part of this Derek Chauvin mindset that drives leaders to ignore listening to people or acting on what they should do or trying to respond to them.
Thank you so much for that. You also stated that actions have consequences. That happened in America. Chauvin has been, convicted. I think he's going to be sentenced. What about the environment in Nigeria? Do workplace abuses of power have consequences here in this climate?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so we're seeing it happening, and gracefully, the Nigerian Industrial Court, kudos to those guys. They're making a lot of difference. We had a first case where somebody was fined for sexual harassment in Nigeria. We have that case now. It happened in Lagos. So a man harassed the lady sexually, very wrong behavior. The lady went to court, and the man was fined for that act. So we have that. A guy had tattoo on his body, and his boss decided to act against him because he had tattoo, and the guy went to court and got judgment in Nigeria. So there are consequences now. Just yesterday, a bank in Nigeria was fined for wrongly sacking somebody in Nigeria. It was one of the foremost banks, one of the banks we celebrate on our business shows. Sacked somebody for the wrong reason, and the Nigerian Industrial Court said, you have done a wrong thing, you got to pay this guy his money. So you say in Nigeria, while people say there are no consequences, we're seeing more consequences for action. Yeah, can they be better? Yes, it can be better, but there is more. Employees are approaching more the Industrial Court. And I think one of the things we should start to encourage is for people to speak up and speak out and approach the court to get judgment. Gratefully, in this particular case, the George Floyd family sued. And that's one thing we need to also bring to Nigeria. The George Floyd family sued the city of Minnesota in a civil case, right? They sued the city because the city is the employer of the policeman. And the city settled out of court the biggest amount for this kind of case we have had in history. Now, that doesn't replace the life of this man, but it created culpability on the city who employed this policeman. Now, after that happened, the state sued the policeman and got him jailed. So you realize that what we don't have in Nigeria, and that's why all the police actions, and whether it's about where enters and a policeman shoots someone, what typically happens in Nigeria is that in Nigeria, our legal system makes it a criminal offense. So it's now the police prosecuting the police for killing a civilian, right? But in the US, you can actually sue the state for the civil part of that debt. And that's one thing I think we should have in Nigeria, where you can sue somebody for being a criminal and also sue that person for a civil suit. I think at that point, we start to get people more responsible and doing the right things.
Thank you for that. Very, very illustrated there. You talked about the need for workplaces to have zero tolerance for abusive leaders. How do we achieve that? Through a code of conduct or board of directors?
Yeah, so the first thing is that we got to have policies. We must have statements in our organization that clearly says we do not have tolerance for harassment. We also need to define what is harassment. Because in Nigeria, for example, many organizations say, we do not support harassment in this workplace. What does harassment mean? So you realize that in some countries, particularly in North America, Canada to be more precise, has expanded the definition of harassment to take care of any act that is uncivil. Let me tell you one very interesting one. There's a state, there's a country now that has agreed that when you stare at a woman in a suggestive manner, it's harassment. Because in Nigeria now, sexual harassment is when the person commits the act or touches the person. But some people have said, no, when you even look in such a way, that is harassment. So it is part of the concept of what we should have in our policies. One other thing we should have in our policy is who defines harassment. Now, let me tell you what the court have said in Nigeria. The Nigerian court has said harassment is not what the harasser did. It is how the harassed person feels. So if I say I am harassed, don't ask me for evidence that I was harassed. I am harassed. It is you that has to prove you did not harass me. So if any employer accuses a supervisor of harassment, the burden is on the supervisor to prove in court that he didn't harass him. That guy has no responsibility to prove whether he was harassed or not. So the point we're trying to say is that companies should have policies that define what is harassment and say this is what we have when you are harassed. And then when employees stand up to say they are harassed, we need to protect them. Too many organizations protect the harasser and expose the harassed individual. In the case of Derek Chauvin, and if you see that last month he got the federal indictment, this guy had done the same harassment to a teenager some years back, but it was overlooked. Now, so the question is, when we overlook these little actions, that's what builds up and do that. So we must punish the harasser. We must protect the harassed. And then sometimes when we have organizations that do those kind of things, they become examples for people to do what is right. But we can't afford to create institutions where harassment is normal, even if it is verbal or in any way. Harassment must end everywhere in Nigeria.
Great stuff. Abayomi Fawehinmi, entrepreneur, also human resources professional. Thank you so much for drawing this illustrative link between the tragic death of George Floyd and workplace professionals.
Maybe I should just quickly mention this before I go.
Yes.
There's a cost to harassment. The cost to harassment to a business is significant. Actually, when somebody goes to court and gets a judgment based on harassment, in the US, it goes to millions of dollars. In Nigeria, it's millions of naira. So it's a business cost, and that's why there's a business imperative for us to do what is right in our organization.
Fantastic stuff. Abayomi Fawehinmi, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate the conversation.